Hi, it's Andrew. It's a Thursday. I feel like those glasses are not going to work for me, but I'm going to have them on for part of today's episode of Chatting While Folding Laundry with Andrew on Thursdays. I've found that I actually invert some of the parts of that name sometimes when I'm saying it and writing it. But it doesn't matter. All of the parts are there, and I'm sure it does matter in terms of how they're modifying each other, but it doesn't matter very much to me. I have a dream today that I'm going to share. It's actually two dreams from June 11th of 2022. So the other day I was... let's just tell the truth. I was scrolling backward through the grid of my Instagram because I sometimes find it comforting to see evidence that I have lived an interesting life. I guess that means that sometimes my life doesn't feel as interesting to me as I want it to. And so oftentimes I'll begin this scroll because I'm looking for something really specific and I have no idea what the actual case was for this particular rabbit hole scroll, death scroll. What do they call that? Death. Is that called death scrolling? It is, right? This isn't a death scroll. I'll call this a life scroll. Because for me, memory and representation, archives are some of my favorite things, which makes sense why I'm making this show. Is it a show? So in this dream, I arrived at a birthday party for my friend Emily. Now, heretofore on this show, I have decided to not use real people's names. And maybe I'm still not using the real person's name. Maybe this isn't someone that I know named Emily. Or maybe I know many Emilys. I do actually know many Emilys. And this particular Emily was having a birthday party, and it was in the theater. And for her birthday party, what she had decided to do was to have a variety show. And she'd invited lots of her friends to perform in this variety show, to do all kinds of, different sorts of things. Sketches, readings, poems, songs, dances. It was a movable feast. That's not the set of words I wanted. It was a delectable bounty. Those are the words that work a little bit better. So I got there and I was standing up on a bridge high above the theater where the catwalk should be. And as I looked down, I noticed many people who I hadn't seen for a very long time, but who I cared deeply for and was delighted to see. And they were all getting ready for a group picture. And I noticed that they were all wearing beige. When I wrote it down, I said they were all wearing beige. Or maybe they were wearing gray on gray. But the important thing to remember was that they all were wearing monochromatic and matching clothes. And Emily caught sight of me up on the bridge, and she looked at me with a kind of anger that wasn't really anger. And but she was sort of, playing anger. And she was like, "What are you doing up there? Get down here. This is a group picture and it's my birthday." And so I was like, I can't. I don't have the right clothes on. then it suddenly struck me that I did actually have a monochromatic beige on beige, gray on gray situation in my room, but I would have to race up there and get it. And as I raced to get it, I realized that one of the things that was going to happen in tonight's variety show was that some people were going to stage one of my screenplays. I can't imagine they were going to stage the whole thing, but I was so overcome with joy and delight that this screenplay would kind of finally come to a moment where like it had been performed for an audience. Because that's the problem about screenplays, is that millions of them never get performed in any way for any audience, and it's a performative genre. It's really the tragedy of our times. Not really. There are so many tragedies in our times. That's not one of them. And I was so overwhelmed by this joy that was the consummation or the finality of this dream. It doesn't feel like a finality, but then I did go right from that dream into another dream, or maybe the dream continued in an unexpected way. And so I will just say to you right now, if you happen to be the person upon which this character of Emily is based, and I told you that this story included you and that you should watch it, you should probably stop now. Because the dream goes on, and I'm sorry that maybe you are making an appearance and I don't recognize you yet, so maybe you should watch the whole thing and see if I'm just missing something, right? Because that's the thing about dreams, is that like there's lots of identity swaps, and people are one thing and another thing. Places become totally different things as they're about to. So I arrived at and in this case, I am just going to I'm going to leave a couple of characters with their original name because they don't do anything that's inappropriate. And I'm not going to tell you their whole name. And if they see this and they know that it's them, great. If they don't, okay. So I walked into the back of Akron Christian Reformed Church. You can look it up on the internet. It's a place that I went for many years, and I have great love for that place and many of those people. And as soon as I walked in, Debbie came to me immediately, although it wasn't really completely Debbie, because she was also channeling the energy of another person who I worked with for many years, who was an administrative personnel, but actually was the spine of everything that happened, and a person who kind of like made sure that everything went off. And that person, combined in the body of Debbie, said, "Oh, I'm so glad you're here. You know that you're preaching today, right? And that there's going to be a baptism." Well, I didn't know that at all, but Harry, then, the pastor, a bit of a rogue, honestly. He'd love that. Maybe you'd love that, Harry, if you're watching. A bit of a rogue came right up to me and said, "Andrew, I'm so glad you're doing this today. This person that's you're baptizing is no longer with us." And as I wrote it down, I realized that essentially what I was being asked to do was perform a post-mortem baptism. And he said, this person left the church a little while after I came, and he told everyone in his family that he was leaving the church because of the nonsense that I was preaching. But now he was going to be baptized after his death. And he didn't sort of ask me about this. He was just sort of letting me know what was going on. And so he led me to the baptistry. I had no idea there was a baptistry there. A baptismal is what I called it in my dream. But because this was one of the religious traditions that they have a baptismal font, which is just a place where they get a little bit of water and they baptize their babies and their children. And it's not an immersion, which, as the son of a Baptist preacher, was the only kind of baptism that we believed in. If you didn't go under the water, then what are you even, pretending? Because that's not real. I'm not going to get off track. He was taking me up to the baptistry, and I said, "Is this going to be cold?" And he said, "Oh no, we keep it warm. It's 400 degrees." And he said, "Some people might think that that's too warm, but I think it's just right." And in the dream, I know what 400 degrees is, and I know that that's too hot for humans to be in. But in the dream, it wasn't like that. 400 degrees was just, that's the temperature of this baptistry. Or baptismal. Anyway, I went in. I was wearing this sort of big, poofy, delightfully flowy gown, and so I descended into the water, and I was a little bit panicked because I was going to have to preach, and I was going to have to do this baptism, this post-mortem baptism, which I'd never heard of before. And as I was descending into the water, I was holding Oreo very tightly close to me so he wouldn't be scared as we descended into the water. And Oreo is my dog. Longtime viewers will know that because Oreo used to sit right next to me sometimes while I made these little conversations. Oh, this is supposed to be a conversation. Did you know that? So I came up with this idea. I don't remember if I've said it in another episode or not, but I came up with this idea that I think that that you should write comments right now while I'm talking to you in order to make it more like a conversation. Now, of course, I'm not going to respond immediately in time, but I can catch up and respond later, and then it will be more like a conversation. So this stream is a little elaborate, so I'm going to make sure I'm not missing anything important. Yeah, so once I got into the baptismal, one of the strange things is that immediately the baptismal font was actually on the roof of this church. And you could still see into the congregation, but it was really high. And as I was thinking about what am I going to do for this sermon that I have not prepared for, and thinking about this baptismal font situation, I noticed that one of the things that was happening was that I was getting higher and higher away from the people and the auditorium itself. I would say that now the baptismal tank had two problems. One was that the edge had kind of grown higher so that I could still pull myself up if I was in a swimming pool and I could look down and see. But also, I would say that it was 4 stories in the air. So much so that while I could see the auditorium and see it enough to notice that it was no longer kind of semicircle pews like it actually is in their Orient in that room, but instead now it was full of theater seats, but I could no longer actually distinguish the faces of the people. But because I was worrying about the sermon, I had come up with this whole idea for the sermon, and I was going to invite the audience to visually imagine one of the great horrors of their life. What did that look like? What did that smell like? What are the chief visual concrete objects that you can see and that you remember? And to do the same thing with one of the great joys of their lives. And I want them to hold both of those things. And I thought, what I'm going to do is whatever liturgical readings are scheduled for this week from the lectionary, I'm going to find a way to weave in an impromptu way these two things, the horror and the beauty, together through, I'm going to find thematic ways to do that through these readings to demonstrate the nature of holiness, which is the horror and the beauty. realized that I was so far up in the air that I might not even be able to like hear when when things changed. So another thing kind of happened around this time, and that was that children in worship, the time when the kids were downstairs and things were quiet in the auditorium, had been led upstairs. But instead of letting them upstairs, they had brought them up to the roof. And now the baptismal was not just a square, tank like the ones that I remember from my youth, but instead it was the whole entire rooftop was a swimming pool. And the kids were kind of screaming and delightfully stomping around in the water back there. And Harry radioed up to me. I had no idea that there was an intercom, but over the intercom he told me that they would be getting to start the service now. And I thought, getting to start the service now? I feel like I've been up here for hours already. Are we just starting? So I knew I had a little ways to wait. And so I decided to look up on YouTube and see if I could find any information about a post-mortem baptism from the Christian Reformed tradition. Because, I didn't grow up in that tradition, so I didn't really know about it, but here I was about to preach a sermon, and I didn't want to be ignorant. So I went ahead. Did this all happen? It did all happen in this dream. I went ahead and looked, and I found a woman with a blonde ponytail who actually gave the whole history of Bacharaic baptisms, because that's what they were actually called, the Bacharaic baptisms, and talked about how it wasn't actually native to the Christian Reformed tradition, but it went back much older than that, to when the church kind of had a stranglehold on who could and could not receive the sacraments. And it was actually initially mostly women who had been refused the sacraments, but who wanted some way of like having this rite of passage performed for them. So they would go to clerics who had also like extricated themselves from the church, and they would bring an animal, ideally a horse, but occasionally a dog. And suddenly I was like, oh, this is why Oreo is here. I had no idea. And so I hit the remote, and I said to Harry, did you know that about these Bacharaic baptisms? You're performing a Bacharaic baptism? And did you know that in general, these are other things I learned from the YouTube video, that Bacharaic baptisms are performed now by witches, and there are only a few very liberal religious traditions who are still performing them. And I was very surprised, that Akron Christian Reformed Church was going to be one of them. And he laughed and laughed. He has a great laugh. And he's like, oh, that woman on YouTube, the woman, is constantly causing me problems. And you know who else is causing me problems? My daughter. She's the one who made me do this Bacharaic baptism. And I was like, this is so surprising that all of this has happened. But like, the service was still not ready to start. And so I started to think that maybe I didn't even want to stay. And at that moment, I looked down, and there was a box the size of a fancy cupcake box. But instead of it having like Victorian frills on it, it was all made out of like pastiched moth wings and roach bodies and spiders. And I was like, this actually is a Bacharaic baptism. And as much as I love being here, and as much as I love Harry, I don't think I want to wait here any longer. And I thought to myself, wait a second. Like, this isn't even how that church is. That church isn't 4 stories high. And I realized suddenly that it was a dream. And so I said, I love Harry very much, and I would do this for him, but because this isn't really him, this is only just a dream, I'm going to leave the dream now. I want to spend some time interpreting the dream or gestating it a little bit, but this is already a long episode, so I'm not going to very much. But I will say that I think that one of the things that I love about this dream is that it's so full of references that I cannot in any way make sense of, and yet it is so full of things that I love. It's a happy dream to me. It's a mundane dream, and sort of waiting and waiting for something to happen that's not happening, and growing tired of waiting. All those things are things that I don't like, but the idea that I would be doing that in a context where I've just discovered this new ritual and I've been invited to wear a big fancy white robe, and my dog is with me, and children are laughing and splashing on this rooftop pool that is / a baptism. It's all very beautiful. So one of the weird things is this dream came to me during a week in which something crazy happened. I don't really know what happened. I'll probably never know. But I had gone. So I used to work at an institution that came to be far more conservative than it was, and it started to discriminate actively against queer people. And I was at that institution in a position of leadership, and I had been there for a long time. And they decided to fire someone because they were gay. It's more complicated than that, but that's the quick way to say it. And so the next year, I decided, to go to. It was the first Pride in town. So it was, this is a kind of a moment in history where, like, on the one hand, this tiny little town in Ohio is going to have its first Pride, and on the other hand, Pride celebration, and on the other hand, this large church in a tiny denomination has decided that they're on a literal witch hunt against queer people. And so, like, I'm like accidentally caught in this fracas, but I decided to go for lots of different reasons. And then I also decided to post about how nice it was on my social media. And this was actually the first time that I had posted on social media unambiguously that I was a queer person. I've been coming out for years to so many people, but I had sort of decided that I couldn't, like, it was only a matter of time till that institution came for me. So I may as well, make a courageous choice. And during that week, then, the week that I had this dream, someone who either hated the gays or very possibly hated themselves because they were gay, decided to send a slanderous, anonymous letter that was very sensational and what's the word? To this institution, to a bunch of people at the institution. And like, happily, in the end, I was able to leave, and it was one of the most difficult times of my life. But the fact that this dream came to me now, to see this, years later, and to realize how much happier I am, and how things, even though it was very difficult to live through, went, helped me move to a better place. It makes me feel like this dream was fortifying me, and maybe the post-mortem baptism that was taking place, had to do with a kind of performative self that I had to live in for so many years. I don't usually interpret dreams on this show because I think the whole point of it is to, number one, share dreams with everybody, because I don't think that dreams are just stories for the psyche of the person to whom they are revealed. I really do think that they are, like, for the collective. And that by telling stories, we invite people to share, like, a set of symbols and experiences that bind us together. I don't know who you are even. I can't see you or hear you. Even if you yell right now, go ahead, try it. I can't hear you. But that does not make me lose faith, because so many voices came to me across time and distance, mostly in books, but occasionally in a movie, never on social media, when I was young, that calmed my heart, that gave me hope, that reorganized my sense of what was and what could be. And I think this dream does this a little bit. So may you be visited by a Bacharach baptism of your own.